runners and it produces baby plants. And so in a matted row situation, or in a perennial situation, in a raised bed, if you can get it to survive in the summer, it's probably going to produce runners and produce baby plants. And so you can actually, you can divide those and plant them somewhere else. Or at some point, if it was really healthy, you could thin it out. But that is kind of how strawberries are propagated. In a raised bed, we're going to want at least one foot between plants in every direction. Probably better to have a little bit more for disease management, so you have better air movement and faster drying. If you plant in the spring and you try to let them run for the summer and pick the next year, then you'll want to remove the flowers that first year. So strawberries need to be planted at the right depth. This is the growing tip. If you plant them too shallow, they'll dry out. And you want to plant them so that the growing tip is not covered, but the soil line is just about right there. You don't want, this is what we call J-rooting. You don't want that. So you can, they're called strawberries for a reason. I was talking to one of our commercial growers here in the Independence area. He remembers when they grew pine trees, so they would have pine straw to molt strawberries. So that is, you need something there to not have the berry in direct contact with the soil. Because if it's in direct contact with the soil, it's not going to be a good quality when you pick it. And side dressing, calcium nitrate or other nitrogen-containing fertilizers in late winter and early spring is something we can do. Or, like I said, we can use Miracle Grow or something and nurse them along. So if you were going to try to keep them over the summer, you can do what's called renovation, going in, removing weeds, thinning them out, and then fertilizing them after harvesting them in July. There's a lot of diseases with strawberries, so you're going to want to pick them often and even pick the bad fruit. So you don't want to leave the stuff that might have something that would infect the good fruit. So pick the bad fruit as well as the good fruit. Get it out of the field. We have fact sheets about some of this stuff. Two-spotted spider mites are a big deal. So these are little relatives of spiders that are almost microscopic that get on the bottom of the leaf and they suck out the sap. And if you want to kind of check it every once in a while to see if you have them, because if you get to the point where you can see webs and all this stuff, is really kind of too late. So I put insecticidal soap up here, but horticultural oil is probably the better thing at home gardening. There are commercial miticides that you're not going to want to spend money, the amount of money for, probably in very limited number of products. But in a home garden, hopefully you won't have too much pressure, and sometimes even just keeping them well watered can help. These tend to be more of a problem when things are dry, actually. That's our strawberry fact sheet. This is a little bit dated. I would suggest going on the Fruits and Nuts part of our website, seeing those videos that Michael has made. There's an article up there I wrote somewhere about growing strawberries at home. All right, so that probably sounded kind of discouraging, but we're going to move on to blueberries, which are, almost all of you can grow. Unless you have just really, really wet conditions, and even if you do, then you can put them in a pot. So blueberries are native here. My mother, I live in Louisiana, and my mother lives in a neighborhood where I can go for a walk and I can see at least 3 native species of blueberries just growing in the neighborhood. And the ones that we grow commercially are a little bit different, or that we grow in the garden are different. But you're probably familiar with huckleberries. That's Elliott's blueberry. There's one called Darrow's blueberry, which is a very low-growing blueberry that doesn't look like a blueberry. And then there's sparkleberry or tree huckleberry that is more of a high-growing thing that looks kind of like a rabbi blueberry and fruits in the fall. But for the most part, the stuff that we've grown here for many years in a home garden is like a rabbi blueberry. It's a species of blueberry. We'll talk about blueberries variety in a minute. We want well-drained soil. So blueberries tend to be native to sandy soils with some degree of organic matter around. Actually, some of them are native to pretty low organic matter conditions. So if you don't have good drainage, you can use raised bed. I'm going to show you how we prepare the soil at the research station, which is kind of how I would suggest doing it. We want full sun ideally, but partial shade is okay. So if you have a little bit of shade, it's not the end of the world. I've shown y'all this picture before of one of our rows at the station, but I'm going to show you kind of how we got there. So we want a fairly acidic pH for this. If you live in the northern part of the parish, or you live in Mount Hermon, then your soil naturally is probably going to be appropriate for blueberries. Even in Ponchatoula, depending on the situation, it may be acidic or not. But we want it typically between about 4 or 5 and 5.2, maybe 5.5. If you're up in the 6s, you know, it may be kind of hard to get it down enough, but you can try with sulfur, or you can put it in a pot. So you can use sulfur to bring the pH down. You just got to be careful with sulfur so you don't burn the plant. Pine bark goes a long way, stuff like that. So this is the type of thing you run into if you're growing blueberries and the pH is too high. If it's too alkaline, then you get iron deficiency because the plant can't take up enough iron. Not because there's not enough iron in the soil, but because the soil is too alkaline. So if you start seeing that, your pH is probably too high, but it makes it confusing because if your pH is too low, you can get that too. So, but most of the time, it's probably because pH is too high. I like this one because it's simple. It's 2 fertilizations a year. You can divide it up into as many as you want. You just put out less each time. But this is easy. This kind of this type of schedule I followed roughly. You know, usually I use triple 13. I just use less of it. And then I use ammonium sulfate or 3300 after harvest. I say not necessarily me. Every Valley's done fertilization before. So whoever's doing the fertilization. So, how many of you have blueberries bushes that are out of hand? Okay, so we sometimes get blueberry hedges, and you know, they're like I said, they can be very long-lived. And so there's a couple ways to prune neglected bushes. Now, I didn't include information about this, but we also do a little study where we're looking at ways to renovate blueberry bushes. And we harvested for yield on that too. And it's only been a couple of years since I cut them back and stuff, but so far, those bushes that are completely unpruned yield the most. So this is for your convenience to renovate them. If you want to leave them unpruned and let the birds have a bunch of them and then pull down branches and harvest it, it's probably fine. But if you want to make your life easier, then you can do what commercial growers would typically do here and go in after harvest and cut all those canes to about knee height. And if that's a healthy established plant, then that will grow back and be just fine. Or you can go in and remove 1/3 of the oldest canes each year for 3 years. And that is the way I learned it when I was in North Carolina. But honestly, with our lemonade plants, it really doesn't, I don't think it's worth the trouble. Like, those bushes that we did that on are not doing that great. And that's a lot of work. Like, let me tell you, when you're trying to get the 1/3 of the oldest cane, you're just selecting for the oldest, biggest stuff in the middle of that bush, that is not an easy task. So I would say, there's nothing wrong with just cutting it to 20 inches tall right after harvest. There's a lot of things to contend with if you try to do peaches. Plums are going to be similar to peaches. So I decided the first time to try a plum. Methley is one that is self-pollinating. Most of these need cross-pollination, even though peaches are self-fertile, plums are not, except Methley. And so Methley is one that has consistently done pretty well in that Rouge area. So we'll see how that goes. I'm probably not going to spray it, so it's probably die and not have good fruit. But we'll see how that goes. Bruce is a green plum, so FYI. Plums have something called black knot in addition to all the problems that peaches have, and so that is another thing to spray for or cut out. There are certain plums native to Louisiana. Chippewa plum, Mexican plum, American plum, and hog plum, so you can find those out in the woods and get. Alright, figs. So again, like peaches may have been fairly discouraging, but figs are something we can do. And I kind of questioned, figs are native to Mediterranean areas, which we are 100% not. Mediterranean climates have fairly dry summers, they have their rains in the winter, they have high alkaline soils, but we can do figs, they do well here. And there's lots of different kinds. Some were bred at LSU back in the day, we had a fig breeding program. Cold tolerance is an issue, especially when they're young. And there will be winters, like I suspect that my 2 fairly young Celeste fig trees may get some dieback this year. We'll see what happens. But once they're established, and actually Celeste is one of the most cold hardy of the figs. It's like a 100-year-old variety, but still one of the best. They need adequate water. Mulch is really good for figs. So a lot of different varieties. You can train them into a tree form, but I would not necessarily suggest it, and we'll get back to that. These are some quote-unquote recent LSU releases. These are all crosses between Celeste and something else. And so Champagne is this yellow one, O'Rourke is that one right there, and then West Tiger that has some stripes on it when it's young. This is something, I put together some different data that I was given, and so Charlie Johnson, Dr. Charlie Johnson, rated cold tolerance after a really cold winter one year, and he found that Celeste was the most cold tolerant, LSU Gold is relatively cold tolerant, LSU Purple was not cold tolerant, but the good thing about LSU Purple is that it would come back from the ground, and it will produce when it's very young. So we're talking about your figs and your Celeste not produced after a couple of years, give it 5 years or so, but LSU Purple will fruit pretty readily on young wood. So even though it gets killed back, it might come back and produce it next year. The other thing over here is soluble solids. And soluble solids is sugars. And so basically Celeste, old Celeste, 100 years old, is one of the sweetest as well as one of the most cold hardy. So again, sometimes old standards for a reason. So you can either train it as a bush or as a tree. The problem with training it as a tree is if you get cold injury on that one trunk, then there goes that. So if you train it as a bush, maybe with like 5 or 6 trunks, 3 or 5 trunks, then you have a little more leeway there. Now that thing is pretty overgrown, but you can come in and just, with figs, you're basically just trying to keep it at picket height. So I like to train them so that, I might cut this part off to keep it going outward rather than going upward. And you would prune that late winter. So shortly before it's going to start growing. Sometimes pruning will reduce cold hardiness a little bit. So with things like figs that are maybe marginally cold hard, you want to wait till kind of right before they're going to start growing in the spring. You have 2 crops. The main crops are on the 4th of July. Sometimes you'll get an earlier crop. The good thing about figs is that unlike blueberries and unlike muscadines, even if you prune off last year's, you can get fruit on new growth. So that 4th of July crop is actually going to be on new growth. You can cut it back and have new growth and it still sets fruit. If you have a big drop, it could be because you put on too much fertilizer, it could be you cut it back way too far, you have too much vegetative growth, too hot, too dry, and sometimes you get these little microscopic worms called nematodes, but if you mulch, that's going to help with a lot of that. This is a fungal disease that I've seen some around here, and if you start to get this type of leaf blight thing going on, you need to get on top of it before it gets to this point. This guy's figs were really kind of overtaken with this, and it's going to be hard to manage that. There's very few fungicides labeled for figs, or basically none. And so if you start to see that type of thing, and then on the back of the leaves that are still green, you see this like webbing stuff, go in and cut that stuff out. So then you're going to see like white fungal growth on the branches and stuff, and you want to get all that off too. So be pretty aggressive about getting rid of that stuff. We have a fig fact sheet. It's listed on your resource sheet. All right, we're getting towards the end. Don't worry. If y'all have anywhere to go.